Hi there, and welcome to Central Texas Gardener. I'm Tom Spencer. These days, we're all looking for hardy shrubs and trees that survive arid conditions. Thanks to author Mary Irish, we have a new resource for interesting selections that welcome our conditions and reward us with their performance. Today, we look at a few of her selections. On tour, two art forms meet at the Umlauf Sculpture Gardens.
In this museum, you can tramp along trails fragrant with mulch and leaves and flowers. Instead of a headset, the sound of birds and waterfalls accompany your contemplation of the sculptures that capture timeless human emotions. Best of all, at the Umlauf Sculpture Garden and Museum, set on 2 acres above Zilker Park, you can run your hands over the sculptures for a sensory connection to Charles Umlauf's passion.
Charles Umlauf was a noted 20th century American sculptor who taught at the University of Texas here for 40 years. He came down from Chicago in 1941 and lived here until he died in 1994. His sculpture is easily accessible. It's primarily figurative, and as you get comfortable with the figurative pieces, then you relax and begin to understand and appreciate the more abstract pieces that he did as well. Back in 1985, Charles Umlauf and his wife Angie gave the city of Austin their home, his studio, and 168 pieces of sculpture. And the city said, well, thank you. And they weren't quite sure what they were supposed to do with all of this, because Charles and Angie wanted to live in their home, and how do you run a museum through somebody's house? And luckily, this piece of property we're on now became part of the city land bank. And so it took 6 years for a group of private citizens led by one of Austin's grand dames, Roberta Crenshaw, to raise the money to build this museum on this piece of property that adjoins the Umlauf's 2 acres. And it's a very successful public-private partnership. We are city-owned, but the Friends of the Umlauf Sculpture Garden fund, manage, and maintain the museum.
Volunteers also help plant and maintain the garden, another partnership to assist the Parks Department. They rely on plants that don't need a lot of supervision or water. On a limited budget, landscape architect Ann Coleman designed user-friendly access on the former dump site. She turned drainage problems into water features. Then Charles and Angie's personal outdoor sculpture garden moved downhill to the public. Angie supervised each placement to convey the sculpture's significance.
I think the first thing is it makes you comfortable. I think nature, working in nature, being in nature, just instinctively relaxes people. They relate to it. And to have fine art in a beautiful garden, each complements the other. And it's fascinating because people who've been here before will come and say, oh, I love what you've done in the back, you know, the way you've rearranged those sculptures. We haven't. We don't have the money to. But since the last time they were here, the trees have lost their leaves, the light is slanting in differently, so they have a whole new experience with that particular piece of sculpture. So it's just a changing and fascinating and enriching experience to have it all in the garden.
Charles left another legacy, his students, so every year the garden features work by one of them. Thanks to Roberta Crenshaw, the garden includes a building for school groups, receptions, and lectures. The garden's latest addition updates and upgrades the wedding terrace and pavilion, a popular venue for events, performance, and weddings. D. Crane's design corrected structural and hillside erosion concerns, but its visual intent was to salute Charles Umlauf. It's a salute that happens every day, where visitors find solace and inspiration from Umlauf's sculptures under the trees.
What's magical about this is some museums are be quiet, stand still, don't touch. And here, all of our bronzes have been waxed, so we can allow touch tours by the visually impaired. And because the sculptures have been waxed and people can touch them lightly, kids can, and they can talk about the different textures and the roughness of the warthog. It feels like a bronze eyebrow, the smoothness of the hippo, its big smile. And so it's accessible in a number of different ways, not only with your eyes, but with your fingers. And true sculpture, I mean, it's three-dimensional. You want to walk all the way around. In a museum, you don't have as much opportunity to. We try and leave room around each sculpture, but it's nothing like here where you can go all the way around as many times as you'd like to. Approach it from different angles as you walk through the garden. Each sculpture is changing as you walk through the garden.
Well, the Umlauf Sculpture Gardens are one of my favorite places in Austin, and I hope that you'll pay them a visit. Right now we're going to be talking about trees and shrubs for the desert Southwest, and our guest is author Mary Irish, on celebrating the publication of a new book.
That's right.
The Trees and Shrubs for the Southwest.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Imagine, yeah.
Great to have you back on the program.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Well, you have made a big impact on my garden through your previous book on agaves and the woody lilies, which is an essential for anybody interested in those plants. And you started this new project, and here it is. It's a beautiful book with lots of great information. And the first thing I think of when I think of Trees and Shrubs for the Southwest is that gets kind of muddy, because a lot of the species that we're talking about here, trees from the Southwest often look like shrubs to folks from other parts of the country.
No question about it, Tom. You know, there's this traditional idea that a tree is something with a big central leader, and then it has this branching pattern that's pretty recognizable, second level, third level, and all that. And you usually can walk under it and all of that sort of thing. And a shrub is a multi-trunk thing. You know, it's got many. But I'll tell you, you don't have to be in desert woody plants very long to realize it just collapses, you know.
Yeah.
Many of them, think about Texas ebony, rosewoods, and many, many others. Acacias, you know, they could be either one real easily. It just isn't as firm a discrimination as it is in the, say, temperate or forest zones.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's a survival strategy on your part. You know, it's like grow small, grow smart. And then grow smart in so many different ways, these plants.
Oh, yeah. If you've ever tried to get rid of a mesquite tree, you have learned what latent buds really mean, and that's why they do it. They have many, especially legumes, desert legumes, have latent buds way at the base, kind of where the stem and the root come together. And this is a big survival strategy. And so the top goes away, those buds are initiated, and as anybody who's ever tried to do this knows, 24 more stems come out right where you cut it off.
Exactly.
And it's a tremendous strategy for fire, any kind of disaster, grazing, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, and all these plants are well defended for the most part as well.
Many of them are.
Yes.
Yeah, many of them are. They have terrifically, either they're very sharp, if they're not very big, but they're very sharp thorns at the axils of their leaves, or sometimes in some of the South American mesquites in particular, I mean, you are looking at things that look like a cow's horn. Yeah. You know, you can really get some dramatic, or some African legumes too, some dramatic thorns. But you know, some of that is just getting used to being around them, and some of them don't have much at all, if any.
Right. Well, there are a lot of friendly species. That's true. Now, the uses in a garden are many for these kinds of plants. You can use them for screening, or as for, you know, accents.
And certainly in a desert climate, or any climate really, shade. Anything that's tall and comes up is good shade. But one shade strategy a lot of people don't really consider is just blocking. Instead of having it necessarily be right over your head, it's off to the west side, and it creates a block. And especially if you layer it up, you know, it can be a very effective block. And you can shade buildings, roofs, windows. Those are very effective shading tools.
It doesn't have to go all the way over the house to provide shade.
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. And things that aren't quite so large, perhaps, or certainly evergreens, they perform like a background. They're like a backdrop to a garden, getting the scale right. They can cool a wall. If you plant these against a wall, that wall cools down. You can plant in front of it more happily. They define areas. They create sort of an atmosphere or a look in a garden, really.
Let's talk about some of the different plants that you highlight. I mean, this is the real joy of the book, is learning about these different species, and there are a bunch of different things in here that are really unusual. We don't talk about that often on the show, even though we love natives. A lot of these plants we haven't ever discussed. Now, Texas torchwood. Now, describe this plant for me.
Well, it's in the same family, believe it or not, as citrus, but it isn't an edible thing at all. But it's a wonderful sort of smallish, 20-foot to 25-foot tree. It almost looks like a legume in a way. It has a complicated leaf, but it has a very handsome sort of spray of pale white cream flowers in the spring. But it's a wonderful small shrub. I mean, well, or tree, I guess the way you want to look at it. It makes a good front piece. It's a good accent and pretty piece in, say, a small courtyard garden or a garden that's not so large. And it's a very rugged Texas native, South Texas and on into the West native. So this is a plant that once established is all on its own without much problem at all. So that's always nice.
So when we're talking a lot of these species, just backtrack for just a sec. You know, you're talking about South Texas species, and a lot of times in the past we couldn't use those this far north, but I think that
things are changing.
Yeah, the things have changed.
I can remember before we started, we were talking about Cordia boissieri, the Texas olive or wild olive, and I can remember learning about that plant in South Texas, in Sarita, of all places. I had a girlfriend who her parents lived there, and they had huge ones down there. But you couldn't even hardly grow it in Corpus. You certainly couldn't grow it in San Antonio.
Yeah.
It just would freeze. And now that's really, it's easy to use, especially up as far as San Antonio, and even in Austin if you site it properly.
Yeah, well, you talked about the Cordia. Let's talk a little bit about that. I love this plant.
Beautiful. And
I was recently on the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center tour here in town, and one of these was blooming in a courtyard designed by Jill Noakes, and everywhere I went, people said, "What was that plant blooming in the courtyard designed by Jill Noakes?" It's the wild olive.
It is. It is an absolutely stunning plant. And this is one that does the same. You can kind of prune it up almost like you do a standard or keep it kind of up high so it looks more like a small tree, or just let it go. And it's a really lovely big evergreen shrub. It is just gorgeous. It has these big old sandpapery, almost grayish green leaves. They're not really bright, shiny green. But those white flowers, I'm a sucker for white flowers when it's hot. I love white flowering plants when it's hot, and they bloom when it's hot, and these big old clusters of white flowers.
Butterfly
just gorgeous.
magnet, too.
Oh, absolutely. Without any question.
Just a great plant. And there's a smaller version that you highlighted.
There's a more desert version, from Sonora and Baja that's called parvifolia.
I would love to get my hands on some of those.
It is great. But this thing over here would probably never need to be watered at all.
Okay.
It's extremely xeric. I mean, I live in Phoenix, and it's a roadside plant in Phoenix. It can take so much heat and so much drought. But it, too, blooms with clusters of pure white flowers, but has very small gray leaves, owing much to its very desert origins. And it's a wonderful, wonderful shrub.
Well, some of these plants have real exotic qualities to them, too. The bird of paradise, for example, is one I think of that is just, to me, that really speaks of, you know,
Mai Tais,
there you go.
But it does. It's that ferny foliage,
right?
That light ferny foliage, and those bright, tropical, saturated colors.
Yeah.
Oh, they're just beautiful.
Yeah.
You know.
And let's talk a little bit about culture for these. And again, just this is most of the plants we're talking about. Good drainage, absolutely essential.
That's always the case in these plants. It really is. Red bird of paradise, nobody actually knows its true origins. It comes out of the Caribbean, where everybody learned about it. But it is a little cold tender. The first thing it'll do is drop its leaves when it gets too chilly. But it will do that almost regardless of what temperature it is. It doesn't look that great in the winter, but it loves the heat. It cannot be too hot for this plant. And so it starts growing about now when it's really heating up. It'll start blooming right about now, and it'll bloom until the first nippy night, which is like 6 months. It's in full bloom.
Okay.
So it's a dynamite plant for a hot spot. It likes to grow on rocky soils. Couldn't care less about the soil. It can grow in my yard, it grows in native soils that are just rock, basically. So it's a really wonderful choice for a hot unrelieved sort of place in full sun.
Yeah, another unusual looking plant is the fairy duster. I like the common name.
Isn't that a sweet name? It's a sweet name for a really rough plant. Yeah, fairy dusters in Texas are native mostly to West Texas, and then on into New Mexico, Arizona. They're not very big. They're about knee-high plants generally, and they bloom with these sprays. They look like little puffball sprays of pink to white flowers. In nature, they're deciduous, being to drop all their leaves in the summer, but you can kind of keep them a little bit more in leaf in a garden. But they too are just growing on natural rainfall practically.
Well, and there's so many cool plants that you highlight in the book, and I really want to encourage our viewers to get their hands on it. This is, you're such a great writer too. That's one of the things I really enjoy about your books is great plant information, beautiful images, trees and shrubs for the Southwest. Mary Irish, it's been a pleasure having you back on the program.
Thank you.
And what's your next project, real briefly? Do you have another?
Oh yeah.
Okay, another book.
I'm working on one that's about my yard.
Good.
Yeah, we'll see.
Okay. Well, we'll look forward to that, and we hope that people, again, will check out the book, and I'm sure that they'll be able to find it in local bookstores or online.
All the above.
All right. Well, Mary Irish, again, it's been a great pleasure having you back to Central Texas Gardener.
Thank you very much.
All right. And coming up next is our friend Skip Richter.
Hello, and welcome to Down to Earth. This week's question is about trees that are losing their bark with either black or gray or brown looking material underneath the bark. This is really common and a question we often get on post oak trees. Those of you living to the east of I-35 probably have some post oaks nearby, and they're especially prone to this disease. It's called hypoxylon canker. Hypoxylon canker is a disease that attacks oaks of many types, but it attacks them when they're stressed. It's out there in nature. You can find it if they do sampling on trees, but it doesn't kill the tree or show up, if you will, visibly until the tree gets stressed. The drought that we have been through in the last couple of years has stressed a lot of our plants in the landscape, and as a result, homeowners are noticing that a large patch will fall off, a patch of bark on the tree, and underneath it, it may look gray, or it may be a black tar look, or it may even be sort of an olive drab, dusty look to the surface. These are all symptoms of various stages of hypoxylon canker. Once it attacks a tree, there's nothing you can do to spray it or control it. You just need to keep your trees adequately watered and as healthy as you can. When they get stressed and weak, this is when it happens. So if you build a house nearby a post oak, or if you put in a flower bed or compact the soil by parking cars under a tree, these are all things that can lead to that kind of stress. Once you see it, you can remove the limbs, but in most cases the whole tree is probably going to be gone because it tends to progress quite rapidly. Our plant of the week is gray Santolina, also called lavender cotton. Santolina is an excellent plant for areas where we're trying to save water. Once you get it established, you can cut back on the water and do very little watering, and it does quite well. You want to plant them about 8 or 10 inches apart because it forms sort of a ground cover. Although it doesn't vine out, it spreads really slowly into a nice mat of gray foliage that I think is really attractive. Then in the spring, or early summer rather, you start to see blooms appear that are yellow and really beautiful. Santolina is good along a pathway. It's good as a border plant or massed in a ground cover type planting. It's one we ought to be using more often because, again, we're not having to deal with insects and diseases. So once you establish it, you get beauty and color for year after year in your landscape. Out in the garden, it's time to make sure that all our plants are adequately watered. You want to give them a good deep soaking on an infrequent basis. Just holding your thumb on the end of a hose and sprinkling it around for a while isn't going to do the trick. Try it sometime. Take and sprinkle around with a hose and watch the water pool up and start to run off the bed. Then go down and dig and see how deep it wet. You'll find it's only about a ½ inch deep at the most in most cases. So we want to provide a good, slow, deep soaking that takes time. Any of the plants you put in last fall or this spring should have a donut of soil around them, a raised berm, so you can fill it with water and ensure that all that water soaks right down in the roots around the plant to keep them alive. This is that first critical summer when we lose a lot of those plants, and you invested quite a bit of money, so you want to take care of them. Any of your fall perennials that might need shaping, such as the fall aster, for example, or Salvia leucantha, now's a good time to do a little shearing or shaping to form them into the shape that you like. If they're getting a little out of shape or unusual, this is a good time to do that. For more plant tips or to contact the Extension office in your county, visit klru.org/CTG.
Thanks, Skip. Now let's check in with John Dromgoole for Backyard Basics.
Hello gardening friends, welcome to Backyard Basics. You know, when I got started gardening early on there, I just fell in love with plants. But I didn't have the money to go out and buy all of the different plants that I liked. So I stole cuttings, I borrowed cuttings, and things like that. Wherever I saw a plant I could propagate, I went and got a piece of it. Pretty soon I had a lot of plants. And it's real easy to do. You might stop at a nursery, or when you buy something, get one of these flats. This one has some nice little cells in it. You'll see a lot of that these days. Or save those old plastic pots that you have left over from gardening. This is another great place. And this one has a little saucer on the bottom that makes it even better. So in order to propagate, you need a good soil mix. Some people use perlite, but I like to use perlite and soil. This is the perlite right here. It's that nice white material that you see. It provides drainage. And I like a little organic matter. I make my own potting soil, and I like to add that about 50-50 when I put this together. So I've got it in there. I've got it right here. Fill it up, water it in. And then there's some tools you might need. And it's simple stuff, like some little pruners like this, and or here's a little knife, easy to carry with you. Hide it at the nursery, you know, when you're taking that cutting. And so it's real easy to do. So this is a Wandering Jew. This is a multicolor one, and this is a beauty right here. And if you want one of these, you just need to take a little cutting. They need to be about 3 to 6 inches long. The other thing you might need to do is get out here and make a little hole. Now you can use a pencil, or you can use any sharp object to pre-make that hole. You don't need rooting powder. These things will root very, very nicely. And so you just stick it down into that little hole and then push the soil around it. And this one needs to be a little bit deeper. And then put the soil around it, and you're on your way. It'll root very easily. Here's another one, a very popular one. These are coleus. Boy, these are easy ones to propagate. And you can see there's multiple stems on this one. So I'm going to take a little cutting right off this one right here. Get a nice cutting like that. Take the leaves off that are going to go down into the bottom of the container. Once again, make a nice little hole. Drop it in there. You need to keep moisture there because these things need that moisture to root. So now I've got a Wandering Jew, and I've got a little coleus. Here's a little geranium that's had some trouble. It fell over in the pot. It lost some of its roots. So I'm going to go ahead and take a piece off of this. It's not a bad thing to do. It helps us remove some of that weight. It's already standing up a little bit better. But when this one goes in, look at that beautiful flower right there. You just take a cutting, and here's another little flower. Let's take that off of there. I would remove some of these lower leaves once again, and then go to a pot like this one, something a little bit deeper because you got a longer stem, and then you put it into that, just like that. Keeping it moist, you're going to have more geraniums. You know, that's a really nice thing. Other plants are propagated differently. The begonias, for example, this one might be a stem cutting, but this little Rex begonia right here needs to be a leaf cutting. This is an easy one to do when you find the different collector types of begonias. Here's a nice long one right here. So I'll take that little cutting, and this one's different. You go all the way up to right there, and the new baby plant starts coming right off of that spot. So put another little cutting. Now this one needs to go deeper so you're at that point. See, the leaf is in there nice and deep on this particular one. So it's easy to do. This one would be a cutting once again. So we would go in there, cut a piece off of the begonia. Always take the flowers off. They don't need there, and a lot of energy kind of goes into those flowers at that time. So let me take this little leaf off right there. Now we've got a nice little cutting. That goes in there. You can borrow these plants from friends, and when you make that cut, they begin to branch nicely. So you increase the size of the plant you're taking the cutting from, and you've got yourself another plant. And many of these lend themselves to multiple cuttings, and pretty soon you'll have a full pot right there again, and some more plants that you've taken out and propagated. Impatiens, these guys really lend themselves to do this. They root very quickly. Some people root in water, but a different type of root system forms in the water than the one in the soil. So the transplanting is a little bit of a challenge for the plant to go ahead and start rooting in that way. Here's a beauty, a strobilanthus. Look at this plant. Another cut cutting off of this one makes it branch out nicely, and you've got yourself another beautiful plant. And either you borrow it or you buy one and propagate the heck out of it, and you'll see that this is a good way to have a little bit of a hobby and save yourself a lot of money. For Backyard Basics, I'm John Dromgoole. I'll see you next time.
For more tips, online video, and our weekly blog, check out klru.org/CTG. Until next week, I'll see you in the garden.
klru.org/CTG. It's where Central Texas gardeners can find tips, recipes, and anything they may have missed on the show. Keep up with the producer's garden on the new CTG blog and join the conversation by posting your own comments, questions, and garden pictures. klru.org/CTG. Central Texas Gardening Online.
Visit klru.org/CTG to learn more about today's program, upcoming events, and to sign up for our electronic newsletter. Check out John's how-to tips and visit Trish's Corner for ideas inside and out. Get growing at klru.org/CTG.